Hello and welcome. This is Tracy Drummond, archivist for the Labor Collections at Georgia State University Library, and I am at the Wimpesinger Center in Hollywood, Maryland, with Frank Waldner, who is going to be doing an oral history with us for the archives of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Today is Sunday, December 4th, 2011. Welcome, Frank. Thank you for agreeing to do the interview with us.
Well, thank you, Tracy. It's an honor and a privilege to be here.
So we're going to start with some questions about your family background. Can you talk to us a little bit about your parents, where they were from, and what kind of work they did?
My parents would have both been born in Baltimore, Maryland. My father, at the end of his working career, was an electrician in a Bethlehem Steel shipyard. My mother was a production worker in a bakery.
And were they in unions? Were they organized?
My father was. I'm not certain which union he was in, but he was a very strong supporter of that union. I don't believe my mother's bakery was organized. And when I say bakery, it was a large bakery that employed hundreds of people.
Okay. So, do you know if your grandparents were in unions, or if there were any union history going back to former generations?
My only recollection in that respect would be I had a maternal uncle who worked for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad.
Okay.
And he was in a union. I'm not sure which one. He also, as I recall, thinking back to my childhood, a very strong supporter of that union.
Okay, so you had some union. Your family knew about unions. And,
yes.
And overall, would you say that they had a positive attitude toward unions, that they thought of them positively?
Very positive, because we were, at best, lower middle class. Some may say working class, and they had a struggle, as a lot of folks in our neighborhood did, and they saw the union as a very positive way to be able to support a family and get by.
Okay, and would you say that your community overall was a pro-union community?
Yes, I lived in a neighborhood where most of the men worked a factory, some skilled, some unskilled. The women, for the most part, were stay-at-home.
Okay. And you said your parents were both from Baltimore, met there, fell in love, got married, and so there's you. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I had 3 sisters, one now deceased, 2 still living.
Okay.
No brothers.
No brothers. Okay.
So I was the spoiled one.
Okay. Well, fair enough. So what was it like growing up then as a kid in your neighborhood with a dad in a union? Upper working class, lower middle class? Is upper working class? It was not good.
There were no upper working.
Upper working. You know what I mean? Well, if you were lower middle class, perhaps you were meeting the higher end of the working class.
Let's say everybody was struggling.
Okay. So it was just a regular childhood school, public school?
Yes, I went to parochial grammar school and parochial high school, which was a bit of a strain on my parents. They had to pay.
Right. And so in parochial high school, were you sort of prepped for the military or for a career or for... And about how old would you have been when you graduated? I know that it...
18.
Okay, 18, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And were they preparing you for anything in particular? Or did you go through school with an idea of what you wanted to do when you got out?
I had absolutely no idea, as most 18-year-olds. I was thinking about other things in the future.
Okay. And so what did you end up doing once you graduated?
I decided eventually to join the Navy. I saw those posters and I liked what they said, and I saw great adventures ahead of me.
Okay.
And I joined the United States Navy.
Okay. But before you graduated, did you work? I suspect for a family like yours, the way you've described it, you were probably expected to have a part-time job if you wanted.
Going back to my childhood as a young kid, 10, 12 years old, I had a newspaper route and brought the evening paper around to subscribers, and also the weekend editions. And then I suppose I was about 14, 15. I got a job in a supermarket.
Okay.
Doing whatever the manager thought I should be doing.
Okay. And so to not interfere with your schoolwork, it was part-time?
It was part-time.
Okay.
Full-time Saturday.
Okay. Okay. And was that a nice jump in pay from being a paper boy?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you remember?
Including tips if I carried the bags to the car.
Okay. Do you remember what you made as working in the...
I don't recall. It couldn't have been much. It would be just a wild guess. My gosh, we're talking about the 40s. It couldn't have been a $1 an hour. I would think it'd be under $1 an hour.
Okay. But you were in a union at that
I
point.
was.
That was your first union.
Even though I was a part-timer, part-timers were expected to be in the union.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so what were your thoughts about unionism at that point?
Strong.
But did you, it was only a part-time job. Did you take it maybe as seriously as...
I can't say that I was an avid supporter of the union in terms of wanting to go to their meetings, what have you, but having listened to my dad over many years about how great unions were for the working man, it was embedded in me that they were the good guys, and that we needed to band together if we were going to improve our lot in life and progress.
So did you attend meetings as a part-time bag boy?
I can only remember going to one meeting,
Okay.
and that was a ratification meeting with a contract.
Okay.
And it was interesting because I can still remember the figure. The part-timers, after all was said and done in this assembly hall, speeches were over and the vote was taken, all the part-timers got a 5-cent an hour increase.
Well, that was a lot. That was a lot back then.
We thought it was great.
Yeah. So fast forward, you graduate, and you finally decide the Navy. And talk a little bit about your experience in the Navy.
I went to boot camp in Bainbridge, Maryland, which is still there, but it's used for some other purpose. The Navy still owns it. I then decided that I think I'd like to work on airplanes or around airplanes. That fascinated me, even though in my family there was never any talk or interest in aviation. But airlines were coming into their own then, and it was sort of the glamour industry, and I think still is to a large extent. So I was sent to airman school in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and from there to Memphis, Tennessee for advanced training, where I was designated as aircraft mechanic.
Okay. So you were in the Navy, but you were learning to fly a plane.
Not fly.
Oh,
work on them.
Okay, work on them.
Yes,
Okay.
fix them so they could fly.
Fix them so they could fly. Okay. And so you joined the Navy in '52, and were in there you were in there 4 years. And coming out of the Navy, with the training, then this makes sense. If you learn to fix airplanes and work on them so that they would run, what was your first job? Heading out,
Working
coming
for
up-
an airline.
Working for an airline
I
as a mechanic.
yes, it was a natural gravitation because I liked what I was doing in the Navy, and I didn't particularly care to stay in the Navy, but I'd like to continue in that field. So I was fortunate enough to get a job at the former National Airport, which is now Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., with Capital Airlines.
Okay.
And this would have been in 1956.
So the Navy took you to Oklahoma and then to Nashville,
To Memphis.
and then you, I guess, gravitated back toward home and started looking for work.
Well, no, the schooling took part in my first year in the Navy.
Okay.
And then I served on, among other things, 3 aircraft carriers
Okay.
and also an air station. Yeah, my
So
training
you
was...
moved around a good bit before you.
Yes, I traveled extensively. The poster really worked out for me.
Okay, good. But afterwards you found your way, or you found yourself back near home, which is how you ended up at Capitol.
Well, I got married the last year I was in the Navy,
Okay.
and my wife worked for the Navy Department, and I was stationed at Anacostia Naval Air Station in D.C., adjacent to D.C., and met her. We got married and settled in that area.
Okay.
And that's where, within short order after being discharged, because when I got married, I was still in the Navy.
Okay.
So when I got out of the Navy, that September of '56, in short order, I was able to land a job with Capital Airlines right there at National Airport.
Okay.
Reagan, I should say now.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. As an aircraft mechanic.
Yes.
Okay. You hesitated a little.
Only because I didn't work on aircraft initially. I was working in the engine shop.
Okay.
Because I didn't have I wasn't a licensed aircraft mechanic.
Okay, so they put you in the engine shop first, and explain the difference for folks who might not understand the difference there.
Well, in order to certify an aircraft as airworthy, it takes you must be a holder of an aircraft and power plant license issued by the federal government, and I didn't have those qualifications.
Okay.
So consequently, although I worked on aircraft in the Navy, I didn't have the necessary qualifications to work on the aircraft themselves at the terminal building or out on the line. So I was assigned to work in one of the back shops, the engine shop. At that point, I decided to go to night school and did for just under a year to acquire my aircraft and power plant license, which then gave me the ability to finally work on aircraft.
Okay. Okay. And that, how long were you in the engine? How long did your schooling take?
A little under a year.
Okay. So it was a local
Night
program, like a
school.
night school program.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then, perhaps you did that with an eye to not only working on aircraft, but also increasing your wages.
Advancement, yes.
Advancement.
When as soon as I got my A&P license, and I believe it's still true in the airline industry, licensed mechanics get a little bit more. You get, it may be, I believe I immediately, once I showed the management my certificate that I've received from the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, that I had acquired my licenses, I immediately got, I believe, a 20 cent an hour increase. 10 cents for each license.
Oh, nice. So, was Capital, so you were there, you got your degree, you started making more. Had you already joined a union? Was Capital already unionized at that
Yes,
point?
it was.
And was it just was it sort of a shop where everybody automatically joined the union? Or was, certain people joined and maybe other workers did not?
No, we had a closed shop.
Okay, you had a closed shop.
Yes.
Okay. And so you had joined pretty much when you started, even when you were still in the engine room.
There was a probationary period
Okay.
of 3 months, and the union would not accept applications until you had cleared your probationary period.
Oh, wow.
In fact, as a matter of fact, I applied to go into the union immediately because of my family background in orientation.
Yeah.
And I was turned down, and I was told I had to wait the full 90 days before I could join.
Wow.
So I couldn't join until January 1 of 57.
Okay. And so it was a closed shop. Everybody was in the union. About how many people were in that shop, working in that shop?
Well, when you say shop, or do you mean?
Well, for Capital.
I'd say there are, all told, there are about 1,500.
1,500?
That was their maintenance base for their entire system.
Okay. And that would have included mechanics? But what other kind of jobs would that have included?
Well, up on the line at the terminal building, of course, you'd have your baggage handlers, your cleaners, your fuelers,
Okay.
different classifications that supported the operation,
Okay.
along with mechanics.
Okay. And they were all machinists. That was the only union in...
That is correct. Capital Airlines would have been, other than pilots and flight attendants,
Mhm.
of course, all IAM.
Okay. And are you saying that pilots and flight attendants weren't unionized at all, or that they belonged to different
Oh,
unions?
no, they were unionized.
Okay.
ALPA
Okay.
and the Flight Attendants Union.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, you started in 56, in 57 you joined the union. What was your early union activity like? Were you...
Sparse initially. I wasn't heavily involved. I was interested enough to start going to meetings and find out what was going on. I mean, you always had the rumor mill in the plant, but you had to go to the union meetings to find out what's really going on.
Right. And were members really active in the union at that point? Did you find that membership, that they were active, that they attended meetings regularly, with they gung-ho, or had they organized just because it was in place and it was something they were expected to do? Sort of, what was the culture?
I would have to say disappointing to me. I was somewhat surprised when I first went to a union meeting, and there were, I think the executive board at the front of the hall outnumbered the attendees.
Wow.
It was very poor, and there wasn't a great change in my years working for that airline, quite frankly, other than when you got down to contract time. Then you had to get there early to get a seat. But once the issues were resolved,
Mm-hmm.
you were back to the hardcore, and that's pretty well the way it was.
Okay.
It wasn't that the guys weren't interested in having a strong union, they just wanted somebody else to do it.
Okay, that's an interesting way to put it, but perhaps still holds true in many places. How long did it take for you to get a position in the union?
I was going to meetings periodically, as I said earlier, until I became shop steward, I believe in 1960. And I then was expected and did go regularly to union meetings, representing my crew, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, and when you were elected shop steward, when you went, did you run on? Would you have run on a ticket with a group of people, or is that more of an individual kind
no,
of?
it was solo. It was
Mhm.
it was just a solo position, and generally speaking, and I think it's probably still true, the guys and gals know who stays active or seems to be going to union meetings and is in the know on what's going on, and they tend to wind up as the shop stewards, and that's what happened to me.
Okay, so were you sort of coerced into running, or did somebody approach you and say, "Hey, I think that's a great idea. That this is something I really feel like I should be giving back to my union." Like, what was your, I guess, attitude toward running?
My recollection is that someone asked me.
Okay.
Yeah, that I didn't really give it much thought. Someone asked me, "Why don't you run, Frank? You're always down there, finding out what's going on and telling us. So why not be shop steward?"
Okay. And as shop steward, you handled a lot of the grievances that when workers had an issue, they would bring them to you.
Yes,
First.
if they had an issue, complaint, concern with with any foreman or management personnel, they were expected to let me know, and we quite literally had what was called a grievance form
Okay.
that they would fill out, and I'd countersign, and then I'd approach the foreman or manager and present it to them with the person's complaint.
Okay. Can you recall some of the typical grievances that, or even some of perhaps the atypical grievances that, or complaints or issues or concerns that you got at the time? Okay.
Well, for the most part, it would be where a foreman would call somebody into his office and inform the person that he was going to be disciplined for a particular infraction, whether it was sloppy work, absenteeism, you name it, and then perhaps give the guy a day off, 2-3 days off.
Okay.
And he would then come to me and, if you will, appeal it through the grievance procedure that that's not fair, and I want a hearing.
Okay. Okay. So you were shop steward, and did this sort of encourage you to look at maybe moving up in the, in terms of being a representative of your local? Did you was it satisfying for you to be a shop steward during?
Yes, but it didn't encourage me to look further.
Okay.
I did my best, and had no thought about seeking higher office.
Okay.
I was quite satisfied with working as a mechanic, and as the need arose, be a shop steward.
Okay. However, despite not having bigger goals, what happened in 1963?
Well, to my surprise, I was at work, and I should preface it by saying in going to the union meetings on a more and more regular basis, I became pretty friendly with the local president. We seemed to just hit it off.
Do you remember his name?
Yes, R.W. Thomas.
Okay. And this-
Richard, but
and I don't
we
think we've
called
s-
him R.W.
And I don't think we've said this. Let me interject for a second. This was Local Lodge 1759 in Alexandria.
Correct.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier in the interview. So Mr. Thomas?
Mr. Thomas was the president, and I was up on my work stand working on an engine, and he said, "Frank, could I speak to you for a moment?" Came down off the stand, and he said, I'm getting my team together. The officers had to run annually in those days. So he said, "I'd like to put you on my slate for vice president." And I was stunned.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea in my mind of seeking any office. I didn't ask anybody about it, certainly not him, but he came to me. So I agreed. I was, of course, I was thrilled.
Mm-hmm.
And
But what did you think of it? What did you think of being off? You were thrilled, but was it just because you were flattered, or did you really think, oh, this is some, I can make a difference. I can help my fellow members, or
be honest, I was probably more thrilled
Yeah.
than anything.
Okay.
And then secondarily, that I'd become part of the inner circle.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be part of the executive board,
Mm-hmm.
the guys who made the decisions, the guys who ran the union.
Right.
And it was thrilling.
Okay, excellent.
Getting carried away.
No. Please get carried away. So you ran for vice president with Mr. Thomas,
Our slate. Yep.
your slate,
Uh-huh.
and you were elected.
Yes.
And then, how did you feel about it once you were elected?
Even more thrilled.
Okay. And that position brought along with it also being chairman of the education committee.
Chairman of one.
A chairman of one?
Chairman of one. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll use the term Tommy. He's now deceased, but always was a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy asked me if I would like to be shop steward instructor,
Mm-hmm.
and I agreed. He said, "Well, the International, which was then on Connecticut Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
is running a program on training shop steward instructors, and the local will pick up your lost time if you will go over and spend a week on a class and take the training, and then I'd like you to run a shop stewards training program for our local." So that all of a sudden became part of being vice president. I was also shop steward instructor.
Okay. Sometimes you hear that the vice president is really more of a wait around and see what needs to be done position, that the president's running things and the vice president maybe has not so clearly defined duties. Did you have clearly defined duties in your job? And I'm talking vice presidents in general, not specifically for the union.
That was the only one, really.
Okay.
Of course, attend meetings,
Mm-hmm.
attend executive board meetings, but primarily the shop steward instruction classes.
Mm-hmm. And how many of those would you teach? Were you teaching as vice president?
Probably every other month,
Okay.
because we'd have a turnover of stewards.
Mm-hmm.
Guys would stop wanting to be one, or transfer to a different department, and we'd have a new shop steward. It was an ongoing process.
Okay.
And we'd hold the training down at the Union Hall.
Okay. And
But my training, of course,
Mhm.
started at the International,
Right.
because that's where I learned the rudiments of teaching somewhat.
Mhm.
I wasn't all that great, but I knew more than I knew before.
I always say with teaching is that I know more than the people I'm teaching, and that's how it starts, and then you get better over time.
Yes.
So, I mean, did you feel like that was the case, that you did it and it was rough, and then you sort of understood how to talk to your
I got-
constituent and how to work
Yes.
with them and what they needed to know. And
I was scared to death the first time I held a group in front of me because these were, for the most part, I was a young guy. These are older than me.
okay,
They'd been around.
so you were still in your
and,
mid-20s, your early.
I would have been, mid-20s.
Okay.
So I'm looking out this audience of guys who have been around a long time, and here I am telling them how to be a good shop steward.
Right, right.
And I hadn't been one that long myself.
Right.
But I got better at it, and to a point where I was extremely comfortable doing it.
Okay. And in 1967, perhaps you were so good at doing what you were doing that you were nominated.
That's when I was, I wouldn't have been, let me think. You're going to have, can you, let me think.
Sure. Okay, so 1967, you were nominated and elected by District 141 to be Vice President East. So tell me first, District 141, what ground did that cover? The entire district? Like, what are we? How many states are we talking?
141 was nationwide. In
Oh, okay.
fact, all the way out up to and including Hawaii.
Okay.
And primarily United Airlines.
Okay.
So
the district was broken down by airline or by type of work as opposed to by region. The district.
The district encompasses X number of local lodges.
Okay.
From Hawaii to Baltimore.
Okay.
All over the country.
Okay.
They had, I'm just going to guess now, 50 locals.
Okay. Across the United States.
Across the United States.
Okay.
And that would be District 141. At the time, I think we had within the IM 5 or 6 districts, and each one would have a component of local lodges they were responsible for. Ours was primarily United.
Okay. And so you were Vice President East, then there was someone else who had been elected as Vice President West.
That is correct.
Okay. And do you remember who that was?
I don't.
Okay. So what territory did Vice President East cover?
It encompassed Omaha, Nebraska, East.
Okay.
And then, of course, the Vice President West was west of Omaha.
Okay.
So I
And-
had...
And you had to did this for the first time involve a lot of travel?
oh, yes. First time in my life
Okay.
that I really got involved in extensive travel. And that's where my initial training as a shop steward instructor came in hand, because as Vice President East, I was assigned by the president of the district to do the virtually the same thing. I would go from station to station under the jurisdiction of 141 and instruct their shop stewards and officers as to their responsibilities and duties,
Okay.
and how it all tied in with our district, and conversely, what our district did to provide services for them.
How did that impact may I ask, at this point, because you got married when you were still in the Navy,
Yes,
and by this time, I assume you have a couple of kids at least?
I had 2
Okay.
at that time.
And how did this impact your home life? I suspect it was difficult for your family.
It was
for you.
It was tough on the wife in particular. Always was. All the years I was active in the IM.
Okay.
I think every man will say that. Maybe even the women representatives will now say that for their husbands.
Right.
But yes, for the first time in our married life, I would be gone for days on end as I would make my rounds to these various stations. So it was tough, and the children were small, so she had her hands full. They would have been my son was born in let's see, 57, and my daughter in 58. So she had her hands full.
Yeah, they were getting on about 8 or 9 at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. But then you were not in that position for very long, because in August of 1967, just 4 or 5 months later,
Mhm.
you became assistant general chairman for District 141.
Yes.
And that was the first.
That would be a full-time position.
And then so that was because and what we didn't say before.
Yes. What we didn't say before was when I was vice president East, I was wearing 3 hats.
Mm-hmm.
I was still remain president of the local. I was still a mechanic when I wasn't doing union functions, and I sound like Perry now. What was the third? Oops.
You chairman of the education committee.
Oops.
So you were at that point you were the president, you were chairman of the education
Right.
committee, and you were vice president East for District 141.
Yes, and if I wanted to go on, if the district asked me to go on business, I had to go to to the management.
Mhm.
It was not a problem, but it was a formality. Advise them that I won't be here for these dates. I'm going on 141 business, and I'll be back on such and such, and open up my toolbox again
Okay.
until my next assignment.
Okay.
So that's the difference. Once I became general chairman,
One job.
just like a business representative, it was full time.
It was full time.
Mhm.
It was one job,
Mhm.
and there was no more sort of shop work for you at that point. It was all
No,
It was all administrative at that. after that.
administrative and lots of travel.
And lots of travel.
Mhm.
Okay, talk a little bit about that job and the additional responsibilities you gained as assistant general chairman.
Well, what happens?
Because this is District 141, so it was all over the United States, not just part of it.
That's correct. I was given essentially the fellow. I replaced the fellow's territory, who became the president of the district.
Okay.
He had essentially the east coast of the United States. He had from Buffalo, New York to Miami, Florida, and everything in between, including LaGuardia, JFK, Newark, Baltimore, Washington, you name it, all up and down the East Coast. So I had his territory, and I also had responsibility to police that agreement for the members, but also to negotiate several contracts for what we call fixed base operators. One would be a fueling company, Allied Aviation. The other was Page Airways, and I negotiated both of those contracts during that tenure.
Okay.
So I was busy.
And that again, I commented earlier. It seems that you had your jobs for 3 years at a time, but in 1970, in August, you were appointed by who?
By President William W. Wimpensingher.
To what position?
I would have been the become the assistant airline coordinator
Under John Peter Paul.
under Vice President John Peter Paul.
Okay. And talk a little bit.
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Oh.
Under airline coordinator John Peter Paul.
Okay. And so going from being assistant general chairman into being the assistant airline coordinator, how did your duties change at that point?
Well, for one thing, my travel sure as hell dropped off.
Right, right.
Because I worked at the old machinist building on Connecticut Avenue, and lived about 12 miles away, I suppose. So it was a drastic change for me. It was an office environment. It was an administrative role, which I had never had before. I had administrative to an extent, but it was mostly keep on the move, one-on-one, lots of dealings with different people, different problems, issues. When I went to headquarters, it was slower pace. I'd be given assignments such as to look over a proposed contract that a district rep had sent in for review by the airline coordinator's office to see if it was adequate to be agreed to. The airline coordinator would bring it over to my office and say, Frank, how about looking this over compared to their old contract, see if it matches up and so forth. Modest administrative functions.
Right. Were you relieved by the slower pace? Were you?
I missed the action.
I could tell while you were saying that.
It was a difficult, not difficult, but it was a transaction, or not transaction.
Less of an adrenaline rush.
It wasn't as personal, interpersonal.
Okay.
I wasn't dealing with lots of folks. I was dealing with a handful of people in administrative function and in an office, and I miss being on the road.
Okay.
To be truthful with you, initially. But as time went on, I realized the benefits of being home almost every night, and being with the kids, and being able to participate more and more in their soccer games, or baseball, and the normal kind of existence, you might say, as opposed to when I was a general chairman and really on the road quite a bit. But as far as the job itself, again, the word says it. I was the assistant, and whatever the airline coordinator felt was something didn't need his particular attention. It wasn't all that important. The assistant could handle it.
Okay. And in 1972, you actually became the airline coordinator.
Correct.
And with no assistant.
No assistant.
With no assistant. And what was that like to go up and not have anyone to help you out?
Tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fortunately I had John Peter Paul, who had been the airline coordinator ahead of me. I had him to rely on because he was just down the hall, even though he was now the general vice president in charge of transportation. I could readily go down and say, John, what do you think about this?
Right.
We had that kind of relationship, and I needed all the help I could get, and so it was a difficult transition, and it was more challenging because of the fact that I didn't have anybody to say, hey Frank, how about looking this over and get back to me later with what you think. I had to make the decision on my own, or oftentimes, of course, ask John for his opinion.
And the airline coordinator position was part of transportation
Yes.
within the union. So what were some of the goals when you were airline coordinator? What were some of the, do you remember some of the big goals?
The primary goal would have been to obviously have the best possible wages, hours, and working conditions for the people we represented, and that meant to the best of our ability to keep those contract benefits improving on and on. You never reach too good.
Right.
The next time negotiations rolls around, you want to do better. The airline districts were required to send in to the airline coordinator's office their proposals that they were going to submit initially to the carrier, the airline. And it was my responsibility as airline coordinator to look those over to make sure that they conformed, for the most part, with what we were trying to achieve.
Okay. And you got them from all over, the locals all over the United States?
No, from the districts.
From the districts.
Yeah, the locals have no responsibility, the airlines, to negotiate anything.
Okay, it's all
Only
done at the
districts
district level.
negotiate
Okay.
on behalf of the locals.
Okay.
They're affiliated locals.
And at this point, you had been in the union about 20 some odd years.
67, 70s, no. 57, 67. No.
No, 15 years.
Yeah.
15
yeah.
years. Had labor changed a lot from the time you got started to this point? Can you?
It was.
And maybe you see it differently, right, as you rise through the ranks, and the way you think about it is different. Going from shop steward, because in the position of airline coordinator, I would think you would be much more aware of politics, the MNPL, the work they were doing, and then really understanding negotiations at this very high end level and how it impacts the international. So can you speak a little bit to, I guess, what you had learned at that point, how the way you thought about the work changed maybe, how attitudes toward labor in general changed, and how you always were sort of perhaps keeping that in mind, that was always informing the decisions you were making? And maybe I'm off base with that. Maybe that wasn't, or maybe it came so gradually and naturally you maybe didn't realize it. But is there anything you can kind of say about?
Well, we had a period of time. One thing jumps out at me is during the Nixon administration, with his wage and price controls that he put on the unions, that had a stifling effect on our ability to provide improved benefits for our members. We certainly had a more hostile environment by the administration during much of that time against labor unions in general. I was removed, of course, from the day-to-day activity on the airport to a large extent. That's a very difficult question. And like you said earlier, it was such a gradual evolution that it didn't jump out and grab you. It had to be a big event like Nixon clamping on a wage and price control on all union contracts, that sort of thing. But I'd have to give it more thought.
Okay. And maybe we can come back to that at some point if you think of it and have any recollections. But that was not where you ended your career as machinist, because from 74 to 94, you were the administrative assistant to the Transportation General Vice President.
Yes.
The date's right on that. Okay. Tell me about taking the, going from airline coordinator to administrative assistant to transportation. How did the roles change?
The roles changed.
Or the work, the job change.
Okay, whereas when I was the airline coordinator, I was, I already cited my primary responsibilities, but now I was also expected and to handle much of the workload for my boss, let's
Right.
say. A lot of paperwork involved, letters that had to be reviewed and answered, a lot of correspondence.
But then did that also sort of take on the responsibility of learning more, because you'd always worked in the airline industry, in aviation, did that take on learning more about trucking and railroads and having to know more about those areas?
Somewhat, but not to a great extent.
Okay.
The trucking industry and the railroads, although they fell under Vice President Peter Paul, I really had very little to do with the two.
Okay.
Now, obviously, we all worked in the same office environment. I would occasionally go to their conventions, but as far as day-to-day activities, very little. They pretty well ran their own show, reported directly to John Peter Paul.
Okay.
So my role was primarily, even though I was no longer airline coordinator, I would say primarily still airline related.
Okay.
Because that was still our big segment by far over the other two. And that's where he had the greatest challenges to meet.
Okay. And what were some of those challenges?
Well, primarily, of course, negotiations. When you have an industry that large with so many airlines and all the issues and problems that go with it, every day is Monday.
Right. Okay.
And between phone calls and telegrams and people looking for some kind of assistance, guidance, you name it, our office was a beehive of activity. It's hard to really pinpoint one thing. I think back and no one. Every day was different. There were no two consecutive days alike. That's one of the things I loved about the job. I'd roll out of the bed in the morning and go to work. I didn't know what I was going to confront when I walked in the office. And when I left the office, I didn't know what I might be doing the next morning.
Okay.
That was the dynamic of the transportation department, and in particular working or dealing with issues involving airlines.
So going from 74 to 94, so that would have been from the Nixon administration through Clinton, the beginning of Clinton's administration. Certainly there were a lot of changes in attitudes toward labor during that time. Can you recall any particular events that affected your work?
Well, I had mentioned earlier the Nixon clampdown or attempted clampdown. Although I must say that through the efforts of our union along with the AFL-CIO, we were able to somewhat soften the blow as time went on.
Okay.
I think he got the message that we weren't going to just roll over. And we continued to make all advances, although somewhat modest compared to previous. we were not, quote, frozen.
Okay.
We kept moving ever so slightly, like an iceberg, and of course we were delighted when he left office, and things then did start to improve once again.
Okay. Improved under Ford, or
That would have been Ford.
Okay, so things did improve under Ford.
Yes, they
Okay.
did. He was not pro-union, but I would certainly say he was understanding. He was a moderate.
And his Secretary of Labor was W.J. Ussery, Bill Ussery. Bill Ussery was President Ford's secretary of. He had been an assistant to Nixon, but
Dunlop was Nixon's.
Uh-huh.
In fact, one of my photographs is signing the National Labor Agreement on behalf of the IM with John Dunlap at the table with me.
But do you think that Bill Ussery might have had something to do with Ford not being as... Because W.J. Ussery, Bill Ussery, started as a machinist.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think he might have not so much softened the blow, but tempered?
I really don't know, but I had met Ford on a number of occasions at Washington functions, including union conventions and so forth in D.C., and he always struck me as a moderate Republican, not out to cut the jugular vein.
Okay.
Somebody you could work with.
Okay.
Nixon was just, he took, well, I don't want to get riled up even thinking about the guy. But I think Ford was a much more fair-minded man. I'm not saying he was a union supporter, but he was somebody, I think, that wanted everyone to prosper.
Okay. And you started your work as administrative assistant to transportation under John Peter Paul.
Yes.
And then Dan Blue.
Dan, let me think now. Wimpesinger, Wimpesinger was the,
This is Tracy Drummond at the Wimpesinger Center. This is part 2 of the interview with Frank Waldner from Local Lodge 1759. Today is Monday, December 5th, 2011, and we left off the last part of the interview talking about his work as administrative assistant to the Transportation General Vice President, and we left off where he had talked about working under William Sherry. Can you talk a little bit about what your last years leading up to retirement were like under Mr. Sherry?
Well, I continued the customary duties that went with my position at headquarters. Bill Sherry, of course, had his, as we all do, his own style, if you will, and but we got along well. It was a relatively short time that I was working with him, but at that particular time is when you could see that our transportation department, the airlines in particular, was facing growing unrest and rump unions trying to make some inroads among our membership. And we were, of course, concerned with what seemed to me, and I can only speak by my own opinion in this regard, it was becoming a classification warfare. Today we talk about social class warfare. Well, in some respects we were having that in the airline industry, where those less skilled than mechanics had gradually gotten into positions of leadership, because they were eager to advance themselves financially and otherwise, while the maintenance groups, I felt for the most part, and this seemed to be true across all airlines, the mechanics had grown somewhat complacent and almost let Charlie do it attitude. And into that breach stepped ramp service personnel, baggage handlers, fuelers, and so forth. And it was not unusual to find major local lodges in the air transport that were dominated by other than mechanics, including the top leadership positions. So they were in a position finally in their own minds to push their agenda. The mechanics were still insistent on them staying well ahead of the quote non-skilled, but
in terms of pay.
In terms of pay and benefits, they felt they were more deserving because of their background, their training, and so forth. But they had given up to a large extent the positions that enabled them to get those greater benefits over the years than the non-skilled personnel. So the playing field was starting to level off somewhat, and the mechanics were taking umbrage at that. But I felt strongly then, as I do now, that it's hard to find fault with somebody trying to advance themselves economically. And if a mechanic doesn't want to take the time and trouble to go to the union hall, become involved, run for office, and all that goes with it, put in the extra time that the non-skilled personnel were willing to do, eventually we saw what happened. And
how did the mechanics react to that?
The reaction of them was, what we need is our own union.
Okay.
And that started to permeate through the mechanical ranks. That, well, the problem is that we're not getting as much as we used to. The gap is slowly but surely closing, and we certainly are more deserving of that, as we always were. They had, and this goes back long before what I'm discussing, there have always been rump organizations around, non-affiliated with the AFL-CIO, who were ready and eager to jump in the breach if it ever opened and grab a hold of the mechanics, the so-called skilled crafts. And AMFA, Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association, was the ringleader in that effort. They had been a thorn in their side, even back in the days of Capital Airlines, when I was working as a mechanic. They were on the scene to a very minor extent, but they were on the scene back in the 60s, prior to and following the strike on Capital Airlines. They were nosing around, trying to get the mechanics to form their own union and break us away from the IM. And then they sort of fell by the wayside for a while, but like a bad penny, they came back. But the second time they came back, the mechanics, to a large extent, had given up leadership positions and roles within their locals. So all of a sudden you had a situation where the mechanics still wanted what they were accustomed to, but the non-skilled were in a position to get a larger share of the pie. So that and when that occurred, and it did, the gap did close somewhat. The mechanics, not all, of course, but a sizable number started to give a ready ear to that kind of theory that it's about time that the true craftsmen had their own union. And this AMFA sounds, it might have the right answer.
So did you see a lot of folks leaving membership with the machinists to join AMFA, or was it like was there? Were they able to really, I guess, gain speed with the other union and really recruit a lot of the mechanics from the machinists to their organization?
No, they couldn't. If you worked, it's still the case, I'm sure. In order to work under a IM airline agreement, you have to belong to the machinist union. That's a condition of employment. Now, if you want to, I suppose, on the side, join some other non-AFL CIO rump group, I guess that's your privilege, but that really never was an issue.
So there was really more bark than bite behind the machinists, the trained mechanics who they weren't joining the AMFA, which was the principal problem, but they were more and more vocal in their support of the idea of having that union come in and overthrow the IAM as far as their representation was concerned. Okay.
And to make matters worse, you had the non-skilled who are now in leadership roles saying, you know what, we really don't need those guys. If they want their own independent union, God bless them. That means we'll be in a position to get even a better deal for ourselves and let the mechanics fend for themselves. So there was real classification warfare going on.
And what became of that? I mean, did they eventually? What eventually? I mean, did
we had raids. We had to defend ourselves at United Airlines on AMFA raid.
Okay.
We had to defend ourselves on Northwest Airlines against an IM raid. I mean, this was a full-scale assault by them, and we had to put on a full-scale defense.
And what were the years that was that, or an approximate date range for that?
This one, I don't know, that's what it came in. Probably late 80s.
Okay.
You'd have to check the records for that.
But full-scale raids, what kind of...
Early 90s, I'm thinking.
Okay. What kind of tactics were they using?
The tactics would have been plain and simple. It's about time the truly skilled crafts got their just due and not be dragged down by these unskilled, untrained other personnel that you're compelled to bargain with as a group.
Right. And how did the machinists counter that? To sort of keep harmony in the locals.
In unity there is strength.
Okay.
That over the years it was shown, well, first of all, where the AMFA did have exclusive bargaining rights on several smaller regional carriers, we could show clearly by displaying their existing contracts that they fell short, considerably short, of what we had with respect to the mechanics under our contracts. So they were woefully behind, but their only their continuing claim was, well, just give us a chance. We haven't been around as long as the IM, and if we could ever break away from the non-skilled, we could really advance rapidly and go beyond where you are now.
Okay. And did the groups sort of come to an understanding or a détente? Were they ever, I mean, is there still today, could you say that there's still some animosity between the classifications, or have they, perhaps with dwindling union power, they've decided to close ranks and really work together and stick together?
I can't speak to today.
Okay.
I can only say that early on when I came in the industry, that never seemed to be an issue. People seemed to accept the classifications they were hired into and worked in. But again, I think part of the reason was, for all practical purposes, as far as administering and negotiating contracts, in effect, it was a mechanics union when I first started in, and for considerable time. And it was a slow but sure evolution of the call them non-skilled, if you will, gradually becoming or taking over leadership roles in many of the local lodges. We get back to complacency again, I suppose.
Okay. And you had talked earlier to me about complacency after the '66 strike, but then let's revisit the 1958 strike against Capitol. And you would have been
in 1968 strike.
58.
No, 50. Yeah,
58.
You threw me. Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We're going way back
In
with this
58, I was a mechanic in the engine shop, and I was also strike captain. When you go on strike, you have to have a breakdown of bureaucracy. You have to form a bureaucracy, 24 hours, 7-day-a-week operation. And I would have been one of many so-called strike captains, where I would have had 15 or 20 fellas under me that I would have to make sure they were aware of what picket duty assignment they had for each week, and if they didn't show up, find out why, give them an extra prod, and try to get them on the picket line when they were supposed to be. And so I spent considerable time at the Union Hall during that strike.
Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy sort of being able to break out from the day-to-day? And
well, enjoyable. Let's say it was.
Was it satisfactory?
It was. I didn't get paid. I was like everyone else. I wasn't getting paid my wages. Many of them went out, no criticism, because you had family support. I had 2 small children myself, but I didn't go out and get a job. Instead, I was able to work closely with what was going on down at strike headquarters, which was our local hall, and pretty much was there almost every day throughout the strike. Now we did get a so-called strike benefit at that time.
From the union.
From the union of $10 a week. And that didn't go too far, even in 1958. But it helped. It helped. I don't believe at the time we had a formal strike benefit program as we now have. It was sort of an informal arrangement whereby the executive council of the IM could decide on its merit who really needed some extra help during a critical time. And after I forget, they may have used a criteria of you had to be out 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it might have been. We started getting $10 a week each, provided you performed your strike assignments.
And how long did that strike last?
41 days.
41 days. And you went on strike for benefits, wages, the typical stuff.
I'll tell you, our strike, we were going on it, essentially most guys, including myself, were going on it for extra money.
Okay.
The wages were were, well, compared to other skilled occupations outside the airline industry, auto mechanic being one of them, if you will, we felt that we were underpaid for our skills and training and education we had to put into getting our licenses and so forth. And money was the number one objective. I can still remember, as it sounds ridiculous today, but to us it was serious. Our buttons and logos said 25 cents or strike.
Wow.
That was our theme, 25 cents or strike.
And you wanted an extra
Now,
25 cents an hour.
We were talking about 25 cents an hour.
Okay.
Now, when that 41 days ended and we went back to work, we found ourselves with as I recall, a 2-year contract, perhaps even 3, that came up to 25 cents.
Okay.
But it wasn't the same formula that we had in mind.
Were you asking for rates that were sort of competitive with, because there's a lot of aerospace industry on the West Coast. So you had no, you were in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So well then was it competitive with other mechanic shops and other airlines? Is that, were y'all looking at maybe a model of other other companies?
No, we were we were really sort of looking out at occupations in general.
Okay.
What does an electrician make? What does a plumber make? What does an auto mechanic make? What does a bricklayer make?
Okay.
A skilled craftsman. if you
Skilled
will.
craftsmen, and then a lot of the ones you just mentioned are traditionally union or are organized as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and a good example, my brother-in-law at the time was in the Teamsters Union, and he was driving a long-haul truck. He was making considerably more than I was for being behind the steering wheel,
Mm-hmm.
going from point A to B, and here I was, at least I thought I was a skilled aircraft mechanic, making much less,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had an example right in front of me,
Right.
and that was across the board. The aircraft mechanics at that point in time, I think it's fair to say, were underpaid for their skill,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully that's improved vastly.
Okay. Well then, but it was just 8 years later, in 1966, that you Capital had another strike. No, it would have been United by then, right? 1961.
Yeah, we merged in '61. Capital merged with United.
Okay.
So you had 5 airlines that went out on strike together, and the primary reason being, again, unity. The airlines in the interim between the time we struck at Capital, I'll take that back, if I may. I believe the airline Mutual Aid Pact may have been in existence when we struck on the Capital Airlines, and the airlines who were members of the Mutual Aid Pact, after so many weeks or days, they had to start contributing into a kitty to help support Capital survive. It was a very popular notion among the airline management, the top leaders, that they get themselves together and form a mutual aid pact that would stand up against any union that cared to take them on in terms of contract negotiations. And because remember what I said earlier, we didn't negotiate all at once up until, what year are we talking about now?
66.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were leapfrogging. We were doing, Eastern would go, and 6 months later TWA would go, and so on and so on. So we would build on each other's contract.
Mm-hmm.
And the airline said, well, no more of that. we're going to form this pact. And if the IAM, as an example, were to take Trans World Airlines on and they go on strike, those of us in the pact will donate mutual aid to TWA to beat the union.
And did they have any success with that?
those are the kinds of things that they're impossible to answer only in this sense, and that is we'll never know. It's my opinion that it gave the airlines at that point more leverage than they ever had before, and quite possibly prevented unions from gaining as much as they had hoped to.
Okay. Do you airlines still have mutual aid pacts with each other, or was that a practice that was, that sort of faded out?
They
after a
finally
while?
fell apart, as thieves do.
Okay.
And I don't know what the situation is today. I've been away from the industry for some years, but it gradually fragmented and went away. Now, having said that, part of the reason I think lies with the fact that when President Nixon came in, at some point, I forget the year, he imposed wage and price controls, and that dampened considerably the ability of a union, any union, to ask for more than, I think the figure was 3.2% in wages and benefits combined. We had a heck of a time at that point coping with what amounted to a presidential mandate through the Labor Department that you will not exceed. And they were not just telling us, they were telling the companies, you can't, even if you want to give these mechanics more money, you can't.
Right.
Tongue in cheek. Wink, wink, wink.
But you said that once, I guess, Nixon was impeached and Ford became president, that the impact of that sort of softened under Ford.
It in my opinion, it did. Yes. Yeah, we had better relations. The Labor Department, yes, I think they brought in people whose agenda was different than destroying unions.
Okay. And then I want to talk about the Eastern Strike, because I know that you were the administrative assistant to transportation at that time. But do you have anything, reflecting back on the PATCO strike, which a lot of people acknowledge as sort of a huge turning point in labor management relations in the United States? Do you have any reflections on that strike and perhaps the machinists' decision to not be involved and to not have a sympathy strike, or the machinists, or how it might have affected?
Well, the machinist union certainly was supportive of PATCO. Now, as you know, PATCO was not an AFL-CIO affiliate,
Right.
which no question from the get-go hurt them badly, and it was a major deterrent for them to start out with once the government just arbitrarily fired the entire PATCO workforce. Over time, the FL-CIO and its affiliates, I believe, came to the realization that, like it or not, even though they're not affiliated with the FL-CIO, they are independent union. Nonetheless, uh, if we just let them get crushed, we're next.
So it's kind of like a wake-up call.
Yes, well put. Yes, it was a wake-up call to organized labor. On the surface, it didn't look like they were getting, and they didn't get at the outset, the full brunt of force of the AFL-CIO, and perhaps never did. I think the IAM, I can't name for other unions, or speak for other unions, but I think the IAM did its best in its own way to assist wherever possible, including walking the picket lines, example at National Airport with the PATCO members.
Okay. So there was some support, picketing and striking.
Yes, isolated instances. I can
Okay.
only speak for.
So it wasn't a
the
union-wide
Washington
effort.
area.
It wasn't like a
No.
top-down order to go out and support, but in certain areas.
It was understood, though.
Mhm.
It was understood and accepted. If you were you had a PATCO unit near your local
Mhm.
that was out on the picket line on strike and so forth, that you would help to the extent possible
Okay.
without it being a formal. It's
Walkout or strike.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
That we weren't on strike.
And it wasn't even a wildcat. The machinists never struck. There was just
No.
sort of shows of support by going out and walking the lines.
I can again, in certain areas that
Yeah.
I'm aware of.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, one of the problems that PATCO also had is, in my view, is that they, and I got to know Bob Poli, the president of the union at that time, somewhat like the skilled aircraft mechanics, I suppose. They felt that they were woefully underpaid for the great responsibility of their position, and it's there. There's no question. With the planes in the air and the
Coming and
avoiding
going.
collisions and
Mhm.
all, you wanted that kind of a person at the controls on the ground. They went into negotiations, and they were demanding considerable increases across the board for all their members. And of course, the government rejected that idea. It came to a clash of wills. So PATCO says, well, we're just going to walk off. And because you cannot operate these airlines without us. Unfortunately, they did. Not to the extent that they might have otherwise, but by bringing in scab labor, by bringing in military personnel, they were able to pretty well gradually get the system working again.
Mhm.
At that juncture, PATCO, the PATCO line to the general public became not one of, we were only seeking what everyone else wants, better wages and benefits. We were seeking better working conditions because we were being worn down on the job with these long hours,
Irregular
shifts and all, and we were putting the public in great danger, and our chief concern when we went out was to protect the public. Money was secondary, but that's not how it started out.
Okay.
Just a little bit of side issue.
Yeah, but then you referred to the strike as a clash of will, PATCO. But I think that if you want to use the term clash of wills, if you fast forward 9 years to Eastern Airlines and to that strike, perhaps that might also be a way to describe
Yeah.
Frank Lorenzo versus the union.
Yes.
And you were as administrative assistant to transportation.
Still there.
And
In a
still
run.
Yeah, and so this must have been a huge responsibility for you, that it must have taken up so much energy for the entire union at that time, but especially your department.
Oh, yes. Without question, for virtually a full year, the Eastern Airlines strike dominated everything. Maybe I'm overstating it, but certainly from my viewpoint, from what I observed throughout our union, Eastern Airlines was that was a spearhead of any advancements we cared to make for the entire union in the future. And if that was blunted or broken, everybody was in trouble. Eastern became the rallying cry that for those of us in transportation, as well as the IM, and eventually for the AFL-CIO, that we cannot let Frank Lorenzo win this battle. Whatever it takes, how long it takes, we can't let him prevail, because organized labor would be set back for decades. And it would encourage every manager, every supervisor, every company executive across the board to get tough, to demand more. And so there was much at stake. Probably in my career, I'd say that I can't think of any other battle, if you will, that had so much at stake for all of organized labor, including PATCO, than the Eastern Airlines strike.
And so how did your department mobilize to combat Frank Lorenzo and his agenda?
The primary responsibility lay with District 100, Charlie Bryan, and his staff, to coordinate and conduct the strike activities with all of its affiliates who may have Eastern Airline employees with members within them. We were at that point, early on at least, we would have been, in any strike, the backup support when needed. And they were able to sustain themselves for a few months until it became obvious that they were up against perhaps more than they could handle alone. So that's when I think I would say our department and our entire union became directly involved, and indirectly the entire AFL-CIO body. I may have mentioned yesterday that I had occasion to go over to AFL-CIO building and give a briefing to the AFL-CIO Executive Council on behalf of Vice President Peter Paul and our International President Wimpensinger on the conditions, the situation at Eastern, what the stakes were for us, and I reminded them, hopefully very subtly, that there may be also some high stakes for them to consider. And out of that meeting came very visible and meaningful support from the AFL-CIO. I began to work hand in hand with my counterpart in a way. Tom Donahue was Secretary in charge of AFL-CIO. I worked with his, in effect, AA, on the phone every other day, giving him an update on the situation Eastern, so he could pass along to Tom, he could pass along to his boss, and to keep them informed on what was going on. We, among other things, I don't know where the idea originated, but it was a good one. we got ourselves a bus, much like you have out here, and I did come up with a slogan, a nice, large bus that would tour all the major cities, Journey for Justice,
Ah.
and painted on the side of the bus, and strikers, primarily from 702 in Miami,
Mhm.
the main maintenance base,
Mhm.
were the crew for that bus. They would go around Washington, New York, Chicago, Cleveland, and when they would pull into those towns, the AFL-CIO affiliates, along with the airline local that might be there, were out supporting them with demonstrations at the terminal buildings, taking up collections, donations, and so forth. So it was something that was visible going on out in the country, not just something happening in Miami at the maintenance base or at Washington at the headquarters, but out in the countryside, something in momentum every day.
Right. Well, with that increased visibility and that increased momentum, what sort of feedback and what sort of how did the general public sort of look at the was it something so internal that maybe it didn't affect, like the way the PATCO strike clearly affected and it shut everything down? What was the sort of general public? So did they support the union? Did they really have an understanding of what was happening?
Well, I wasn't on the journey, but I was aware that the ridership on Eastern Airlines
Mhm.
took a tremendous tumble. Because remember, he attempted to continue running the airline.
Right.
Just
right.
because we went out the door, he didn't close his doors.
Wow. Okay.
He tried as best he could to continue his operation at a greatly reduced level, of course. Brought in scab labor, sufficient to almost do what was necessary at the maintenance base to keep a sizable operation going for a while, although greatly reduced. And as far as the general public mood is concerned, tough question.
Okay.
Somebody goes out today on strike and say, what's the general public think about it? It's a tough question. It depends on, I suppose, some pastors showing up disgruntled because Eastern doesn't have a flight available for them.
Okay.
That's a tough one.
Okay. Well, when did the machinist sort of? Sorry.
Because from my perspective, then and now, I had the tunnel vision of looking at what was happening internally
Yes.
within the union and the unions,
Mhm.
not what the public
Right.
was doing.
Your focus was somewhere else.
Our focus was on Frank Lorenzo
Uh huh.
and making damn sure that he didn't accomplish what he set out to do. We didn't set out to destroy Eastern Airlines. We didn't set out to get him booted out of his job. We set out to get a decent collective bargaining agreement. He set out to destroy this union. So that was the starting point. So where it wound up, unfortunately, was eventually the destruction of the airline.
And when did the machinist? Do you remember having a moment where you saw that despite your efforts and the union's efforts and despite the hard work, did you have that moment where you realized, oh no, this isn't going to end well? Do you remember that? Do you remember having that?
Well, to answer that question, we had the Miami local, which was the largest, and Jolly Bryan's district is right down the road from there. They set up a food bank for the strikers, and they went around town and did a magnificent job of getting vendors to donate essentially leftovers, if you will, not spoiled food, but palatable. And they maintained in Union Hall, in the back of the Union Hall, a place where they would store dry foods for strikers who would come in and ask for assistance. I would go down, we had donations coming into headquarters from, not only from within our union, but from AFL-CIO unions as well. And periodically I would fly down to Miami with a check, which I would present to Charlie Bryan to cash and distribute those funds to primarily to the local there to maintain that food bank, but also to disperse as best he could to other locals that might need some extra assistance to survive. Because when you're out for months and months, your manpower, your army, if you will, dwindles to where you're down to the real hardcore folks that are willing to hang in there to the bitter end.
So some folks were finding other jobs and trying to get back.
Finding jobs, transferring out of the area.
Okay.
We had suicides. We had divorces. I mean, we
Very
knew what was
stressful.
happening.
Yeah.
It was a terrible, terrible ordeal for people to go through, all because of one guy's greed. And so, answer your question. Because I was going down there regularly, and I could see the falling away, if you will, of members hanging around the hall, picking up dry goods to sustain their families, seeing some of the executive officers of the local peel away, move out of the area.
Like every couple of weeks you'd go down and there would be diminished
I'd go,
activity.
Yeah, on average, I'd go down about once a month.
Okay.
And I could see less and less activity, fewer and fewer members around their battle stations. Morale sinking a little bit each time. It's tough. It's tough. It broke my heart to go down there because I knew what they were going through. You have to go through a strike yourself to really be affected by it, to really appreciate what it means. It helped me immensely, in a way, to have gone on strike as a striking member on Capital Airlines for those 41 days, because I suffered. My family was hurting. I had to borrow money from family and relative friends and barely get by, and just enough gas to put in the car, and missed house payments, that type of thing. So I could, to quote Bill Clinton, I could feel their pain.
Right.
And it really meant something to me. So I empathized greatly with those folks, and it really tore me up to see what appeared to be our army retreating somewhat and Lorenzo still hanging in.
How many people lost their jobs once the airline filed for bankruptcy? How many machinists lost their jobs?
Thousands?
Thousands.
I can't quote a figure. Charlie Bryan would know.
Okay, and perhaps we'll get to interview him at some point. What did shutting down Eastern do to the morale of machinists? Can you speak to, as a whole, as an entire union, like across the country? Did it make people more wary, more frightened for what might happen to them, or do you think it was such a unique case?
I think the latter. I think it was unique. It might have had in the airline industry, it might have had just a bit of chilling effect, but it wasn't long lasting.
Okay.
But in general, I think life went on in other industries, and it was just a unique situation to Eastern, which hopefully will never be repeated. And of course, as you know, they eventually had to file for bankruptcy, and Martin Shagru came in and took over and ran the airline effectively. They booted Lorenzo out, and he ran away with sacks full of cash, no doubt, which further aggravated me to know that he broke our backs in that strike, destroyed thousands of people's lives, and left with a payoff. And for him, life went on as usual.
For you, what has been the most satisfying part of being, or what was the most satisfying part of being a member of the Machinists and working with them? Like when you look back, what is the
Being
thing?
able to know that from the time I became shop steward to the time I retired in 1970, that I did my best, and as a result of my efforts, that I helped so many people in so many ways have a better life. Best example I could give you. I think my greatest satisfaction is when I was local grievance committee chairman, or when I was district general chairman, going into a grievance hearing or perhaps an arbitration case and salvaging someone's job, having someone return to work, and knowing that, didn't think of it then, but as the years go on, I think back how I might have played an important part in that person's life, being able to go back to full employment, good wages, good benefits, and things worked out for him or her. I have great satisfaction. That's my joy.
Okay. Well, before we wrap this up, are there any other work experiences that you would like to share? Or any final words you might have for the interview?
In terms of
just anything we didn't cover that really stands out to you as being important or affecting you,
our international relationships that we developed with our brothers and sisters overseas in foreign countries. We became, I forget the year, but the IAM, I don't know if they still are, but they became affiliated with the ITF, International Transport Workers Federation, housed in London, England. And we became affiliated with them. As a result, we were able to coordinate and cooperate to the extent possible with our colleagues in Japan, in Germany, in England, all around the free world where they have trade unions. I had the great pleasure of traveling to England several times, to Switzerland. In fact, I flew to Switzerland with Bob Poli, and that's how I got an insight. And Africa, Ireland. It was a great personal pleasure for me, but also it was important for me to understand that we were, as proven to be the case, we were facing and slow but sure coming to a global economy. The airlines in particular, we are global. And every airline today that flies international has a partnership with some other international carrier. Well, we want partnerships with their workers so that our work can't be farmed out. Think about how fairly easy it is to fly a plane, across the ocean on a regular, to use the United Airlines as an example. We fly from New York to London, and and they have workers in London who are willing to work on that airplane over there in conformance with FAA regulations back here, do all the right things, but make $5 less an hour.
Okay.
See? So we have to not only help them, but we needed to protect and preserve our ability to keep our work at home.
Right.
Unfortunately, airline companies operate factories with wings. You can fly it somewhere else. Of course, now they do move factories wholesale
Yes.
to other countries, but you can do the same thing with an airline. So the ITF became a very important. Also, I played a very, I shouldn't say important, but I played a very active role on behalf of the Vice President in dealing with our international colleagues.
Okay. So you were sort of the face while he was home running things. You would go and do a lot of the face-to-face stuff.
Yes, they'd hold ITF convention in London or wherever it might be, and I would fly over as a spokesman for the IM, our positions, where we are in collective bargaining, the kind of benefits that mean something to our folks. And by the same token, they'd exchange that information with me, and I'd carry that back with me. And we'd develop some very close relationships. I still get greeting cards at Christmas time faithfully from good friends in England and Africa and Japan. So evidently it made some impact.
I think you had a wonderful career with the machinists. Well,
Not only wonderful, I got to be one of the luckiest guys in the world.
yeah, you think so?
I know so.
Charmed life?
I know so.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
Well, thank you ever so much,
I
Tracy.
appreciate your efforts, and I thank you. These are always very enlightening for me. I always learn a lot when I can sit down and talk to a member, and learn a lot of things about the machines you just can't learn from reading the documents that we get at the archives. So with that, I'll end the interview.
Well, thank you ever so much. It was my pleasure, honor, and privilege to participate.